Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Undercooled. Today we have a special guest that I'm going to let Tim introduce because it's someone that Tim's been working with for quite some time in teaching his undergraduate lab course. So Tim, introduce our guest.
I'd be happy to. We have the one, the only, the soon-to-be legendary, as soon as this episode is published, Dr. Christian F. Casper. Welcome to the show. We're very happy to have you here.
Glad you asked me to be here. Thank you.
And we always just start with some introductions. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Christian Casper, as Tim mentioned. Most importantly, I'm the father of 2 daughters, husband of 1 wife, and I'm a teaching professor of technical communication here at the University of Michigan.
Well, you've already answered the next question, which is what do you do for your day job? Tell us, what is technical communication? Let's actually start with that.
Sure. Yeah. So what is technical communication? I think is pretty straightforward. It's the writing and speaking and graphical communication that occurs in the process of doing technical work, or more broadly, any kind of writing, speaking, or graphical communication that's related to technology. I think it's actually somewhat even more important, or what I sort of emphasize with my students, is what technical communication is for. And so what I tell my students is that technical communication, or workplace communication in general, is to change things from the way they are now to the way you want them to be. Okay, and that's the heart of what I'm teaching. Technical communication as a way of making things happen in technical work. That's the short answer.
Mm-hmm. And so then a teaching professor in technical communication, what is it that you profess? What kind of classes do you teach, or what other professional activities do you get up to?
Yeah. So my appointment is almost entirely teaching. I'm on the instructional faculty, not the research faculty. And so my job is officially 90% to teach, 10% to do other kinds of service. My teaching is a mix of intro and upper level classes. So this is for me is all team teaching. I work basically entirely with teaching partners in one of the technical disciplines. Tim is one of those from MSc. I teach an intro course in our first year program with a faculty member from aerospace engineering. And I, of course, also teach, as mentioned, with Tim in the junior lab in material science and engineering. And I teach also currently a senior design course in biomedical engineering. And I've been doing that course and my first year course that I mentioned since I started here 14 years ago. And I started working with Tim just 3 years ago.
That's great. So I remember before we used TechCom to help us with our teaching, and I even remember way back when the TechCom faculty would teach students in their senior year only.
Yeah.
And that was a mess.
Yeah.
And it's,
Yeah.
So I remember when Engine 100 first started and TechCom became an integral part of that whole effort because Engine 100, of course, is really a technical communication course disguised as a design, build, test engineering course.
Right.
And what I noticed was how much better our students could write in our junior and senior level courses because they actually had that experience in Engine 100. And I think it was remarkable.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to start, Engine 100, because you've done a lot of those.
Yeah.
Tim teaches an Engine 100 course, but with a different TechCom faculty member. But that's kind of where the huge transformation that I see in teaching students how to communicate with the written word first started going.
Yep.
So how does the magic work? How do you teach freshmen how to write without ChatGPT?
That's the challenge right now, right? I think the most important thing is to help students understand right away that the kind of writing they'll do in engineering is going to be actually fairly different from what they were doing in high school, and not just in like their essay writing and stuff they did in high school, because they're not going to do basically essays or anything. That's not a genre they're working with. But it's even different from their lab reports in high school, because those are typically, the purpose of those is typically to provide a record of what they did. But in engineering, what we emphasize with them is that, the way I approach, the way I do tech comm in engineering, the real focus I put on it is argumentation. Students are making claims, warranting those claims with evidence. And I think it's very important, actually, also with first-year students especially, not to start by teaching them how to write reports or make slides, but to just introduce them to the idea of argumentation. That the basic building block of everything we're going to do is a claim warranted by evidence. Once they have that, they can understand how to use that to construct a paragraph, a section, a figure, a slide, you name it, and to take those things and build them up into larger structures. So starting with that basic building block, a claim warranted by evidence, and then showing how you can construct various genres from that. That's my approach, and that's pretty successful, I think.
That's fascinating. That's how I tell my graduate students how to do it.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Because everything in science
Yeah.
is all about where's the evidence for that statement you just made.
Right.
And my graduate students are great at making statements without evidence.
Right.
And so, because they're based on pre-existing ideas that they have, but they don't have anything to support their claim.
Yeah.
So it's, I've always told students that writing is part of thinking.
Yep.
You haven't really thought something out until you've written it down.
Yeah. Writing is epistemic, is how we put it in my field.
Right. And so, how many times, I'm sure Tim has experienced this, when you're going to write up a scientific paper and you start writing your paper and you go, uh-oh, because you realize you're writing stuff that you can't support.
Right.
And so that's why writing is so critical to the whole thinking process. And the earlier you teach. So it's awesome to hear you say what you just said.
It goes the other way too. I often, when I help students, and Tim's seen this many times, when I'm helping a student like make a slide and they're taking some data, in a spectrum or something, and I'm asking them, what's the title of this slide? The title should be the claim that they are making based on the evidence. It takes a lot of work to get from a spectrum or a thermogram to what is the claim here. So I see it the other way as well. Sometimes they have evidence and it's, the evidence is nicely laid out, but they don't know what it means.
That's right.
Yeah.
We need to rewind for a moment. You've already invoked two words that I know are near and dear to your heart. The first being genre.
Right.
And then you've also waved the flag of epistemology.
Yeah.
So how does a technical communication professional get to know such fancy highfalutin language? How did you get to where you are, essentially?
With great difficulty. Yeah. Do you want me to tell? This is the
I meant the means by which, not the manner in which.
Right. This is sort of the process by which one becomes a technical communication instructor. Yeah. So most people don't grow up wanting to be technical writing teachers. Most people don't go to undergrad wanting to be technical writing teachers. Most people don't go to graduate school wanting to be technical writing teachers. So we all kind of stumble into it in different ways. The way I did it was I was a chemistry major in undergrad, but when I went to graduate school, it was largely because I didn't know what else to do. I also knew that I've never been a lab rat, let's put it that way. So when I got to graduate school, I had confirmed for me what I already suspected, which was that I loved chemistry and I hated being a chemist.
That is exactly my relationship with physics.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, long story short, I took a master's and worked as a technical writer in industry here in Ann Arbor for several years. And while I did that, I did a second master's in English, over at Eastern Michigan University, and then did a PhD in rhetoric at North Carolina State University. And then when my wife got a faculty position at Eastern in biology, I followed her back here and taught sort of part-time at some other places before I got latched on here at U of M in January of 2011, and I've been here ever since. So for me, it was liking chemistry, but finding out what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And so that, of course, gave a natural connection to wandering your way toward the field of materials.
Right.
I actually remember we met maybe in my first year here. I want to say 2014 or
Probably,
2015.
yeah.
Must have been 2015. So I guess you'd only been here for a couple of years at that point.
Yeah, and I remember knowing you back in that time range.
Right.
Yeah.
We, I think, did some kind of writing workshop together. Was it a journal club?
It was a journal club.
It was
the
a journal club.
Engineering Education Research Reading Group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, this seems like a cool guy. And then our paths diverged.
I thought the same thing.
But then they reconverged.
Yeah.
And it was a very happy circumstance.
Yeah, likewise.
But I imagine that when you're working with students in material science in particular, having that chemistry background is a really large asset.
And one of the things a lot of my students and I relate to is that we both came to material science after being in chemical engineering for a while and realizing that this is where the chemistry is happening.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I've always thought that what makes a chemist different than a material scientist is that chemists can actually pronounce those long nomenclature-inspired words for crazy molecules.
You said it, not me. That is an observation I have had. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or
stuff.
Yeah. Or there's a polymer I had in mind. It just slipped out, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did it start with poly?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, nice.
Well, of course.
But material sciences just use acronyms.
Yeah.
PMMA.
Yeah.
I even know what that one means, but that's interesting. So again, back to Engine 100. You have these freshmen, they're not really experienced with thinking like a scientist or an engineer. So it's really interesting that you bring with the writing instruction the core way of thinking about doing science. But there are still technical aspects of writing that are right out of an English rhetoric assignments. So how do you have a large class.
Yeah.
What's your workflow to be efficient with dealing with 60 students? How do you grade their work? How do you give them feedback? What kind of instruction do you give them to help them move along?
Right. When I first started, I kind of thought that my job was to just sort of thoroughly evaluate everything my students did, report-wise or communication-wise. What I realized later is that's not my job. My job is to sort of coach them through the process of learning. And so what I will typically do over the course of a semester is, as I mentioned, I'll start out with argumentation. And what I like to do first, and I'm actually grading these this afternoon for my summer students, is I have them just write a paragraph where they have to make a decision about something based on some technical information and write a paragraph with that decision and the basis for the decision. And that's the way of introducing that claim evidence structure. Once they can do that, then we can start talking about a figure. Okay. The claim, if they're something they're arguing visually has evidence, and ideally the sort of how the evidence is warranted in the visual field, the claim in the text, usually in the caption. Okay. From there, they can start putting text and visuals together, and only then can they start doing sort of short, complete documents. And then you work from there to do more complex things that are actually responding to things that are happening in their design work or their lab work, as the case may be. So, sort of nuts and bolts. I actually do very little writing of feedback. I very much prefer actually to do audio feedback, where I have the students work in front of me. I'm just in my office alone, I have the students' work in front of me, and I have an audio recording going where I'm just talking through what I'm seeing. So starting by saying, "Hi, this is Dr. Casper. I'm giving you some feedback on such and such an assignment, and my purpose here is to give you a sense for where you are and where I'd like you to go from here." And then talk through what I'm seeing that's good, that I want them to keep as they keep going, and the things that I want them to change and how I'd like them to change, or how I'd like to think about it more. And that's just what I do with everything throughout the semester.
That's cool. So they're not in the room with you.
No.
So you just send them your audio recording.
Yeah, I do it on our course management system. It goes right into a comment on their work in Canvas. Yeah.
But you can put an audio recording in.
Yep, right in
Oh,
Canvas.
that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yep.
It's really interesting.
And so what that does is it keeps me from focusing on little bitty things. Because if you get into talking about like grammar, students think that's what you care about as a writing teacher.
Yeah.
But I care more about their argumentation.
Right.
And
this is the irony of the two of us working together is I love grammar.
Right.
So I'll work with students on the sentence level and be
Right.
like, we are going to wordsmith the shit out of this sentence until it's perfect. But then he gives them the 50,000 foot view of what the entire deliverable that they're producing is supposed to accomplish and whether it's working as an entire unit.
Right.
But I really like, again, it sounds just like when I talk to my graduate students.
Yeah.
They have to write a PhD thesis, and
Right.
it's a very overwhelming
Yeah.
document to
Yeah, I've
contemplate.
done that.
You've both done that, so I know
Yeah,
you've
been there.
Yep.
And so what you do is you say, look, first, just write an outline of what each chapter is going to be.
Yep.
And guess what? You can start writing the first 2 chapters right now, even though you don't even know what's going to be in the last 4.
Yep.
And they go, what are you talking about?
Right.
And I'm going, you're going to write your methods and techniques. That's
Yep.
trivial. You're going to do your literature review. That's a lot of work, but it's trivial, and you better do it because
Yeah.
you need it.
Yep.
And the next chapter, the next parts of the chapters you're going to write, just like when you write a paper, you never start with the abstract and
Right.
introduction.
Right.
You start with the results section.
Yep.
Because that's what you did. You collected the results, and it gives you a chance to reflect
Yep.
on what they mean. And you got to do that first.
And the results section in a paper is where the figures tend to be most concentrated. And so, as Tim knows, what I like to do in coursework is have students do slides first and do a slide talk. And then that gives them basically the whole, or at least close to their whole set of figures for a paper.
Right.
Then I'm going to say, okay, you've made your figures. Adapt them from a slide figure to a paper figure, and then write your paper around them. Use them to outline your paper.
Exactly.
That's actually something I wanted to talk about here is material science in particular is a highly visual field in terms
Right.
of the types of evidence that we use
Right.
and the way we communicate about things like microstructure and crystallinity.
Right.
These are often best conveyed through figures.
Yeah.
So when you're working with our MSc students in the junior lab course, for example, can you talk a bit more about what you're doing with them to help them integrate visuals effectively into their communication?
Yeah, integrate visuals effectively in their communication. So, as I mentioned before, I find that students will often have good data before they know what their argument is, right? You've seen it.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of, way that looks, and the one thing I love about the course that Tim and I do is that I can actually spend time in the lab and work with the students as their data, as they have their data. So instead, it really drives home the point that I make especially with my first year students, where I say, how many of you were told, by a parent or somebody that it's really important to know how to write and speak well, because you can do the best technical work in the world, but if you can't explain it, it's worthless. Most of their hands go. Okay, that's not wrong, but it's like incomplete, because writing and speaking is an integral part of doing technical work, right? And so, what a lot of my work in the lab course is looking at, they're doing like, an IR spectrum of a polymer, and they're looking at the peak, they're looking at the peaks, they've got the spectrum like in a slide, they got a bunch of peaks, and I'm asking them, what are those peaks? What does this seem to correspond to? And given that this seems to be what you found, what does it mean for your work? So it's sort of working from here's our data to actually work from the data to the argument. I forget the exact question, so I'm not sure if I'm answering.
Well, thinking about this is as good an example as any. We use figures so much in technical writing and also in oral presentations
Right.
in MSE because of just the highly visual nature of our field.
Mhm.
So maybe a different way to pose the question is, in working in this MSE course compared to, for example, the biomedical engineering senior design course,
Right.
are there differences that you notice between the disciplines
Yeah.
that are sort of specific challenges to teaching communication in MSE versus other flavors of engineering?
Yeah, probably. There's specific disciplinary challenges for every field, and I think for MSE related to biomed, let's say, in biomed, typically what the students are working with is something or someone that's there in front of them that they can really picture, right? They're working with, somebody who needs technological assistance with doing something, living their life in some way or healing from an injury or doing surgery if they're working with, in that sort of area. So with them, it's a similar thing, just working to figure out what their actual argument is. But in MSc, the challenge is that we're working with things that aren't as readily sort of tangible or accessible to their everyday experience. So they have to learn, what materials are like, what various kinds of physical data or chemical data look like and what they mean. And so it's just it's not as sort of directly relevant or correspondent to their everyday experience. So helping them interpret data is important, and it differs from sort of standard chemistry in that they're not typically working with molecules; they're working with extended sort of things that aren't as easy to sort of draw a box around and say, in this molecule, this functional group does this and whatnot. In an
Right.
extended material, it's a little harder to. It's a bigger. Yeah, it's harder to sort of to get your arms around.
I'm thinking about the semiconductors project that we do.
Yeah.
And the students, of course, want to know, how do semiconductors work? And I'm like, what a great question. There's at least one more Nobel Prize waiting behind that.
Right.
And of course, we want to try to explain it in terms of structure. Look at this plane of atoms. And the students are kind of saying, okay. But yeah, it's such this like large scale concept to try to hold in your head. It's not like pointing to a water molecule and saying, when the hydrogen moves this way, it does that. I'm waving my hands off camera like people can see it.
Yeah.
Well, but the real way to explain that is to go back to chemistry. The reason silicon is because every single bond is accounted for, right? It's got sp3 bonding, and every single bond is there. There's no more bonds, no fewer bonds, which is why it's an insulator. But the energy to break one of those bonds is relatively small, which is why it's not an insulator with a giant band gap. But it's a little bitty thing, which means we can screw around with it, which means we can dump in some extra atoms where bonds won't all be made, or you have extra electrons hanging around. I just saw this great thing in a comment of this EV thing I was looking at. Someone said, I only charge my battery to 50% because I don't want to haul around the weight of all those extra electrons.
Yeah.
But the weight of electrons is tiny, but the impact of electrons is huge.
Yeah.
And so I really think chemistry helps tremendously with that sort of extended property now that you have a solid that goes on for infinity as far as the atomic scale is concerned.
Yeah. And the particular nature of the sample matters, like what kinds of defects it has.
That's right.
Which is different from working with molecules.
But the scale of the numbers is so fascinating to me that just a little bit, you know. So I'm calibrated in semiconductor modes, which is atoms per centimeter cubed. But to think that the difference between 10 to the 15 atoms per centimeter cubed and 10 to the 19, which is 4 orders of magnitude, makes the difference between something that's almost insulating to something that's a degenerate semiconductor, meaning it's a metallic material. And even 10 to the 19 is such a tiny amount because there's 10 to the 23 atoms in that thing,
Right.
centimeter cubed. So that is what 10 to the 19 is. It's 4 orders of magnitude. So that means what is that? That's like a tenth of a percent. Is that right?
100th of a
A
percent.
hundredth of a
Yeah.
percent. So if you think of a centimeter cube, that's hardly any atoms, and yet it's made that much difference. It's crazy.
That was I remember that was a conceptual hurdle I had to get through starting in materials, is how much impact a tiny change in the composition of a material can make.
Right.
It's mind blowing.
It is. And then it works. Not only does it work, we can control it to unbelievable levels.
Tune
and
it.
make PN junctions, and off we go.
I was listening to a podcast earlier today about ancient coins, and the person started saying something really interesting about refining processes and, you know, how high of a purity of silver or so on were they able to obtain. And then he stopped, and I'm like, no, you were just getting to the good part.
Right.
So now I have to go research that, but that's a problem for another day.
Right. But it still comes back to communication.
Right.
Because, you know, the ultimate law of communication is you can't explain something unless you understand it.
Right.
And understanding it is actually the hardest part of communication.
Right.
And, you know, and it's very refreshing to hear that that's really the focus of your instruction.
Yeah. It takes a while to get there because to be able to do it well, you have to learn how to ask the right questions to get
be
the students.
self-critical.
Exactly. So you know, if I'm working with the student to develop a claim from evidence, you know, I have a background. One thing I didn't mention is my background actually is in inorganic chemistry, but I wasn't a solid state chemist. So, you know, the students have gone through the curriculum. My job is to ask the right questions to get them to realize that they've gotten to the answer. And so when I hear it, that's when I say, okay, write that down. That's the title of your slide there. And that just takes time to learn how to do as an instructor.
This might be a me problem, but I notice with our juniors that that's something that I can sort of help in that process because they have accumulated enough expertise at that point to be able to get to answers. But when I'm working with freshmen, sometimes it's very challenging to even get to them to that point of having a kind of a clear conclusion that they want to reach and realizing that their data tells them something. So what's your experience in doing this kind of work with, say, first year versus third, fourth year students?
Yeah. I mean, basically what you said, and you know what one of the things that our curriculum kind of does is, it's the thing I like about our curriculum is that our students get sort of design and they get experience in design and like real technical work kind of throughout the curriculum, and so they're not like learning the scientific bases first and then putting it all together at the end. Right? They're not just doing physics and chemistry and then sort of putting it together into engineering. They're actually starting with engineering so they can see this is how engineering works. Then in the middle years, they kind of learn the technical concepts. And they come back then and do a bigger design project after that, typically. And so, with first years, typically we're giving them a simpler design project. We give them a lot more guidance. In that, for example, we will give them their design requirements. Whereas with seniors, we make them define their problem and develop their requirements. So I'm thinking sort of outside of MSc right now, but you have to kind of scaffold it that way. Don't give them the little bits and then put it together at the end. Show them the landscape first, then give them some of the conception, the knowledge and conceptual tools, then do it really well at the end. That's like you mentioned before, Steve. We used to have the technical writing course for seniors. And I was talking to Leslie Olson a couple of years ago, and she was describing that to me. And she said, yeah, basically the message was, when you got to be a senior and you took this course, the message was, this is how you should have been doing it all along.
Yeah.
So that's not what we do anymore,
Yeah,
fortunately.
it's fascinating hearing you talk because I've been a mentor for MDP teams,
Oh, yeah.
multidisciplinary design.
Yeah.
And the things you're talking about, teaching the students of figuring out what their design requirements are and all that is, of course, what they have to do in
Right. Yeah.
MDP. But they're not given any instruction in that. And those of us who are the faculty mentors have no idea how to teach this.
Talk to the BME people. They know. They know how to do it. How to teach like requirements, developing requirements.
BME people, who are that?
Oh, BME.
BME.
BME, yeah. Biomedical engineering.
Well, we muddle through it.
Yeah.
But remember, we have freshmen on the team,
Oh, right.
juniors on the
I
team,
forgot that.
sophomores on the team.
I
So there's a
forgot
big mix of students. And the biggest struggles I have with the teams is the younger students have no idea what to do.
Right.
And they just find stuff that looks cool and show it to you without
Right.
reading it.
Yeah.
Or they make claims where there's no evidence for these claims.
Yeah.
And the paper's a piece of junk that
Yeah.
they looked at.
Yeah.
Whereas the upperclassmen are really good. They know how to write, they know how to present, but they're like automatons. They just grab stuff out of the web and put it together and think they're done.
Right.
And they don't do that last higher level step of being self-critical.
Right.
And so they try to wow you with data without understanding it.
Right.
But it's funny how it all comes back to this visual component
Mhm.
where they'll show me plots and a plot is horrible. It doesn't tell me anything.
Right.
What do these lines even mean?
Yeah.
Well, I got it from the literature.
Right.
And I'm like, no. And I said, besides the fact that you didn't reference it properly, it's not your work, you need to redraw the plot and write adapted from and redraw it in a way that's meaningful for what you're trying to tell me
Right.
or our sponsors.
Yeah.
And they're like, what?
Which
They're
you-
like blown away that I tell them that. And, the state of visual communication in science is abysmal.
Yeah.
This is all across the board. And I met a guy who's a science communicator, and he was and his name now, I lost it. I'll think of it. But he got his PhD in applied physics at Stanford,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he gave his PhD defense.
Uh-huh.
And at the end, he passed. And the professors came up and they said, that was an amazing talk you gave. We've never seen such good visuals. That was amazing. But, your science was kind of mediocre. But this was great. You should go into science communication.
Right.
And he did. And he gives these talks where he pitches minimalism.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you need to think like Steve Jobs and
Yeah.
Johnny Ive. You need to think that every drop of ink is precious. But
Yeah.
as a scientist,
Yep.
he used the right words. He said, it's all about signal to noise.
I use exactly that analogy. Exactly that analogy.
And you need to understand what your audience wants to see
Yep.
in the image and make sure there's no distractions.
Yep.
And the worst enemy is Excel that makes the worst
Yeah.
charts.
Yes. Yes.
And Jean-Luc Dumont.
Yeah.
That's his name.
Yeah. I know.
Have you seen him talk?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I've been in the same room with him at least once or twice.
Yeah. So I first saw him when I went to visit my friend Eric at Harvard.
Oh, yeah, Eric.
And
Yeah.
Eric told me, go see this guy. He brings him in every year.
Yeah.
And I did. And I came back and went to Alec Gallimore was the
Right.
graduate dean at the time. And I said, Alec, we got to bring this guy in to talk to our students. And he goes, absolutely.
Yep.
So we paid for him and he started coming. The pandemic stopped. We should bring him back.
Yeah.
'Cause he was.
That's right. Yeah. I've seen him here.
Yeah.
Before that.
And, but that's hard to teach students think you get it because you were a chemist.
Yeah.
But I've
Yeah.
had talks with your boss, and she thinks she knows all about this, but she's not a scientist.
Yeah.
And
Getting
she
there.
doesn't
Yeah.
quite understand.
Yeah.
But what John Luke did was amazing. He gives all these plots and shows why they're terrible,
Yep.
why they don't.
Yep.
And at the end, he says, "Where do you think I got all these plots?" And the answer is always last month's editions of Science and Nature.
Yep. Yep.
Because they're horrible.
Yep. And what you were describing, and what I heard, especially a short while ago, was when we were talking about claims and evidence. But when I was talking about those before, I was putting in terms of claims warranted by evidence. And so what you were describing, the ways that these visuals are terrible in many ways, is that they don't have clear warrants. And a warrant is the thing that makes the evidence support the claim. And so as Tim knows, I spend a lot of time with our students working on that. You know, if they have a plot, I want them to tell me, after we sort of work out what it means, then I want them to work in the visual on showing what it is in that visual that makes it support that claim,
Right.
and highlighting and explicitly labeling,
Yeah.
and really showing the filling in that gap between the data and the claim I've made from it.
And going back to your example of
Yeah.
spectroscopy,
Right,
what's often important is the position of the peak
right,
and the width of the peak.
right.
And so if you're going to illustrate that in a visual, you should maybe draw a little line right
Yep.
at the top of the peak and write the number down so everyone can see it. And then you should maybe draw two little lines showing the width and
Yep.
then a number, and then you can leave all the other numbers off
Yeah.
the plot. And students, they can't handle that
Yeah.
because their whole life they're supposed to put tick marks everywhere and
Yeah.
all their numbers.
Right. It's like I have to give all of the data.
Yeah, and that's not what's important, not only for the audience but for themselves.
Several students every semester have to go through a period of mourning when I tell them they can't use grid lines.
Yeah.
Right. Or, you know, a similar example is when our students are doing thermograms, and they're just they're saying, here's the melting point. You know, they'll have a thermogram, and you know the caption will say the melting point is at 210 C or whatever, but they don't actually point that out in the
Right.
figure. You know, I need that connection, that direct connection.
Do you also teach the accessibility issues with figures like
Yeah, I should do more.
like colors? 20% of the population is colorblind.
Yeah, it comes up. I should do more, but it comes up.
Yeah, and I love Jean-Luc's. His laws: never use a legend.
Right. Yeah, that's what I tell my
Always
students.
just draw a line.
Exactly. I
Just
tell
be
my students.
explicit about it, and then if you do that and make sure you're not using different colors, everyone's going to be able to read it.
Yeah. Or I'll tell students, use color coding, but make it redundant with something else.
Yeah,
Right. So your data points could be different colors, but they should also be different shapes,
yeah.
for example.
So we've talked about writing.
Yeah.
We've talked about visuals.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about talking.
Right.
And of course, this is in my mind, this is the third tripod of the third leg of the communication tripod. You know, we write, we draw, we speak.
Right.
But also, I'll raise the specter of AI briefly. In the age of mass-produced written drec that will be shuffled around everywhere on desks until the end of eternity, the ability to speak effectively and clearly and persuasively to another human being, I think, is going to be one of the main skills that differentiates our students from each other when they graduate and go into the workforce. Those who are able to have very productive face-to-face interactions will be the winners, for lack of a better term. So what are some things that you do? I know freshmen in particular, I hear a lot of freshmen saying, I want to get better at public speaking.
Right.
How do we get them there?
Give them reps.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
All right, problem solved. On to the next one.
Well, and I can say more, because in my E100 section, we do 5 presentations throughout the term. 4 of them are in teams, 1 is individual, and they're all keyed to certain stages in the project. And I tell them, I'm, you know, I'm not going to give you a lot of things to think about and remember about how to deliver a presentation. I just want to see you do it and get some experience. And if there's something you particularly want help with, I'll give you that help. But mostly, I just want to get you experience doing this. And that's, and so that, the key to speaking is, key to becoming comfortable as a public speaker is just to do it. And also helping them this gets back to argumentation, helping them understand that what they're doing, not only in their, of course, in their writing and speaking, but especially in their speaking, it's not. Students are often told when you give a technical presentation, you should tell a story. And I think that's actually mostly wrong. I think you should make an argument. And if you tell a story, you can tell a story, but it should be in support of an argument. So, the student's tendency, as you know, is when they first start out, they want to tell the story chronologically of how they went from the beginning of the project to the end of the project.
With a heavy focus on all the things they did.
With a heavy focus on making sure you know all the work they did. But I tell them what I want instead is an argument. I want to know the outcome of your work first, and then you explain what it means. And if you need to tell me a story about how you reasoned through something, then that's okay. But primarily you're making argument. And if you tell a story, it's in support of that. But primarily you're making argument.
So the book that Nancy Duarte wrote, Resonance, which obviously you know.
Yeah, I know of it. Actually, I haven't read it in a while.
I love the way that she says it. It's just similar.
Yeah.
She still would say it's a story.
Yeah.
But there's good stories and there's bad stories.
Right.
And a good storyteller will understand who the hero of their story is.
Right.
And most students in a lab class think they're the hero.
Right.
And they want to tell why they're the hero because they did this amazing amount of work and they want to tell everyone about how great they are.
Yeah.
The problem is, and it kind of gets to the question I was going to ask you, which is there's an ABET requirement for communication. And the requirement isn't that they can write well or tell stories. It's that they can communicate to a range of audiences.
Right.
That's an interesting way to say that.
Yeah.
So if you're going to communicate to any audience, the hero has to be that audience.
That's right. Yeah.
Not yourself.
That's right.
Just like when, Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up, he doesn't view himself as the hero. He views Luke as the hero because he wants Luke to do something.
Yeah.
And so the story is all about getting your audience to do what you want them to do, which goes back to the very first thing you told us at this podcast to be about what do you want to change when you communicate. And so, and what you need to do, and this is another way, is what Nancy Duarte says, and she gets it from Hollywood, which is the master of all storytelling. You want to give your audience a magical gift. That magical gift, it's magical because it's going to change their lives, right? And your gift is your result. And the mechanisms that you've postulated to explain your result. Because what do if you go give a scientific talk, what do you want? You want the audience to read your papers and cite your work, because that's going to lift you up. Or you're giving a talk at an interview talk. You want them to hire you, right? And so for every audience, you need to identify what do they want, so you can give them what they want. It's a different way of thinking about speaking. And the last thing you want to do is tell them how hard you worked to collect this data.
One of the other things I tell first-year students, especially in sort of my intro talk, is after I sort of characterize what technical communication is and what it's for, as I said, it's to change things from the way they are now to the way you want them to be. I give them some examples of that, and they're all cases of somebody using your report or whatever to make a decision, something like that. And so I tell the students that your communication products, your reports, your slide decks, your talks are tools that other people will use to do their jobs. And so you should design your communication with that in mind. It is something somebody else will use to do their jobs. And so it actually maps really well onto the kinds of engineering work they do. If you're designing a device for somebody, the students tend to understand if they're designing a device for somebody, what that involves. And so if you're designing, a report for somebody to use for something, it's the same thing, more or less.
Well, before we shift to the last chunk of the show, something that I love doing with the older students when they're ready for it, in terms of self-evaluating their own reports, presentations, is to ask them, what is your criterion for success for this deliverable?
Right.
What action will your audience take that will tell you that you did your job?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very kind of high level thinking for them to do this theory of mind exercise to say, what is my audience going to think when they interact with what I produced?
Yeah.
But for the ones that we can get across that line, that's where it really feels like, I think we've succeeded with this one.
I do freelance editing for grant proposals, and one of the questions I started asking when I meet a new client, for a particular project is, for a proposal, what is it going to be? What will it have been about this? Think about when you win this grant. What will it have been about this proposal that made it win?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which basically means, what do we need to develop here?
Yeah.
What is the reviewer going to see that makes him score yours high enough to win?
Yeah.
Of course, that's the dirty little secret of going into a PhD defense when you haven't really read the thesis as carefully as you should have.
Yeah.
Which rarely happens, right? But all you have to usually ask the PhD student is, why did you do this?
Mm-hmm.
What's the impact of your work going to be? And they never know.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I always ask, where are your error bars? And they never know that one either.
Yeah.
They magically fell off the slide somewhere on the way to the talk.
Right.
Yeah.
But the error bars, that's a structural thing
I
that
know.
the advisor should have done.
Yeah.
But the advisors rarely talk about the 60,000 foot view,
Uh-huh.
which is what's absolutely critical in any proposal. It better be in the proposal. You better know what the impact of this work's going to be.
Yeah.
'Cause that's the promise that you want to convince your reviewers
Yeah.
that you can do. So, if I did the exercise you just said, to me, it's obvious.
Yeah.
I made a really good case for why this work matters and
Yeah.
why it has to be funded.
Yeah.
But that's something most graduate students who are actually doing the work, they're all in the details. They're all in the weeds, and they never take the time to do that last step.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important step for them to learn how to do.
Yeah. They all want to learn. They all want to, especially first years, they think engineering is about doing stuff that's cool,
Yeah.
not about doing stuff that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Important distinction.
Yeah.
Well, so let's break the fourth wall a little bit.
Sure.
We'll address the audience. Hello, audience. Nice to see you, in a manner of speaking. So at Michigan, we're very fortunate. We have a technical communication program. We have experts like you and your colleagues who are co-teaching our classes to make our students great communicators. So if someone is, say, on the faculty at a different institution teaching, and they're teaching engineering, they don't have access to technical communication experts, what sort of advice would you give to someone from a STEM background who wants to do more with teaching communication in their own courses?
Yeah. I actually dealt with this question recently because a young faculty member here in a different department who was a student of mine over a decade ago had me over to her office just to talk through how to be a good mentor to her graduate students, communication wise. And one of the things that I sort of worked. One of the things we talked about is, again, getting back to, engineering communication and scientific communication is really about argumentation and making arguments, making claims warranted by evidence. And so you want to think in that way. One of the pieces of advice I gave her is, when you're writing a paper. So my wife's a biologist, and in her field, it is very common for titles of papers to be a statement with the outcome of that work. And so this is not the convention in this former student of mine's field. They said, I can't do that. But that this is really helpful for me to think for every paper my student writes, the first thing they should do is write the biology title, which is,
I like that.
yeah, in one sentence, what did you find?
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of work from there. And, you know, each section, what's the take home message, and write to that. I think, you know, I think, yeah, this is something I'm still kind of thinking through with her. I know how to teach, but it's hard for me to teach others, someone else, how to teach. But I think the biology title sort of thing is helpful, and asking students, you know, about every unit in the paper, every figure, every section or paragraph. You know, tell me what your claim is here, and then see if that's actually there in the paper. Often it's not, and if it isn't, it should be.
So you give us a great tip for dealing with grading huge numbers of papers.
Yeah.
You don't. And
Right.
You do this trick with
Oh, they all get
the-
grades. Yeah.
But you actually give them audio
Right.
commentaries
Yeah.
about their writing. Do you have any other tricks like that? Because I think that's a really interesting thing for faculty who don't have the opportunity to have somebody else come in and teach that part of the course.
Mm-hmm.
It's one approach that I know that the English department here has done is they've done a lot of work on peer evaluation.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm sure maybe you can talk about some of that
Mm-hmm.
and other strategies to handle the massive amount of writing that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get through all that? So the peer peer rating is one thing.
That's one thing.
So is, you know, the audio, or there are others that
Right.
others might in our audience would care to hear about?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to understanding what you're trying to do with each assignment, focusing your feedback on that, and not on extraneous things, and being disciplined about focusing your feedback on
It's
that.
the same as the issue of figure creation.
Yeah.
You don't have to say everything about everything. If you know what the pedagogical purpose of the assignment is, tailor your feedback to that, because if you've already told the students what they should be learning from it, you can then direct them to whether they have learned what they were supposed to have.
And in fact, I started to kind of describe, you know, what an audio feedback, what audio feedback sounds like. But I'll give you a little bit more. So I'll typically, you know, when I've read something my students have written, and I'm going to give them feedback on it, I start the recording and say, as you know, I'm going to repeat a little bit what I said before. You know, this is Dr. Casper giving you feedback on your design requirements report. My purpose here is to give you a sense for where you are and where I'd like you to go. That's all stuff I said before. Then I'll say actually what the pedagogical purpose was for this, and say what I was hoping to achieve here was such and such and such. And I'll say, I think you got this really nicely, or I think you got this pretty well, but there's some work, or fortunately more rarely, I think you kind of missed the boat.
Mhm.
Right? So it's, you know, here's who I am. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's what I wanted to achieve. Here's how well I think you achieved it. And then here's details about that.
Do you give them suggestions of how to redo it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you build in some way for them to resubmit?
Yep. Yeah, I'm pretty generous with resubmissions.
Good.
Some people aren't, just because it can get overwhelming, but I don't know. I like to give lots of opportunity for resubmissions.
Yeah, we did an episode with somebody who's developed a technique called grading for growth.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the pillars of that, Robert Talbert was our
Oh, yeah.
guest.
Yeah.
And he talks about how important it is to have lots of reassessment without penalty if you really want them to grow and to learn.
Yep.
So that's
Yeah.
great.
I'm pretty generous with that. And I also try to structure things so that we're actually building things up, you know, as we go, rather than just doing one thing and then a different thing and then a different thing. So
So another strategy I know a lot of faculty will use if they don't want to read.
Yeah.
Say they have 60 students in the class and they don't want to read 60 papers. You put them in groups and you
I do
just
that too.
grade
Yeah.
one per group.
I do that too.
And I presume you can do the same thing with your audio feedback for a whole group.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, just mechanically on Canvas, what you do is you just set them to student groups, and
Yep.
one student submits, it gets credited to the entire group, and when I do audio feedback, it gets posted to each student, unless I set it otherwise, which I usually
That's a great technique.
Yep.
Never heard that one before.
don't.
Well, and it also gives the opportunity. I've certainly had this experience reading through and responding to student papers. Suddenly there's this huge change in the paper.
Right.
The section ends and it's like the tone is different, the voice is different, the style is different. The hello, student two, I guess I'm going to address you now.
Yeah,
If I'm
yeah.
feeling very snarky and I have
Yeah.
a good relationship with
Yeah.
the particular team, I will actually go to that extent.
Right.
But it is to make the point that, of course, most of our work in reality is done in teams as well. You need to unify with your teammates. You're not just taking 4 pieces of stuff and stapling them together.
Right.
Hopefully,
Ideally.
Well, and with that, we're essentially addressing the students now. So there are actually some students who follow the podcast as well.
Great.
What's your advice to those who are up and coming? What should they focus on? What areas of technical communication do you think are most important for them to cultivate?
I think something Steve said a little while ago is really good. So graphical communication is quite arguably the most important aspect of technical communication. You know, you really can't do engineering work without graphical communication. And as I said, I typically have my students build their reports up from their figures. So I give them two basic things they should be trying to achieve with their visual elements. Maximize signal to noise ratio, metaphorically, which means every pixel you use should be helping us understand the point you're making. And if there's anything that's not helping us, you should get rid of it. Or minimize it, as the case may be. And secondly, make cause and effect relationships clear. That's something I can't really go into at length here, but I really give them, I want my students from a practical standpoint to come away from my classes with those two things. If they're developing their figures, in addition to argumentation, claims warranted by evidence, in support of that, maximize signal to noise ratio and make sure that cause and effect relationships are explicit and not just sort of implied. And that's a whole hour and a half talk, so I can't really do that here, but those are the two points.
Yeah, the cause and effect thing in particular really speaks to me because if you're not doing that, if you're only talking about the effect, that's just phenomenology.
Right.
And it's not bad, it's necessary actually, but it's very incomplete.
Right.
If all you can say is this happened, you're not really adding much information to the body of knowledge that's available to your audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with your physics background.
Well, sure.
Because, and I agree, I reject any paper that comes across my desk, in a journal review.
Yep.
If it's just a gee whiz paper.
Yep.
Because I could care less about that. I want to hear your mechanism. Why did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't formulate a mechanism for what caused your results to happen, it's useless to me. I mean, it's peripherally interesting. I'll keep it in the back of my mind because it might be an opportunity. I'm glad they're going to publish it, but it shouldn't be in the good journals. It should be in journals that'll take anything. And those journals have that's good that they do that because they need to be published so we know, but it just doesn't rise to the level of the quality of the paper.
Then you got to get faculty to actually publish. And I've known faculty who had this is a long time ago, who had a sort of standard below which they would never publish.
Right.
So they wouldn't put like work.
And it can be useful. It's not without value, but yeah. So I want to ask you one last question.
Sure.
So, I like to think of all education in college as being, our job is to make ourselves obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
Our jobs are to teach our students how to be self-educated going forward so that they don't need us anymore. Classes are highly overrated.
Yep.
You need to learn how to educate yourself going forward by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little tougher with communication
Yep.
because you can't just pick up a book and read it.
Mhm.
And I imagine your answer will center around, some of the truisms like everyone needs an editor.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, how do you teach?
Speaking as a freelance editor, I strongly agree with that statement. Go ahead.
So, how do you teach students how to improve after they leave the university?
I don't do it explicitly, I mainly way I mainly frame what I do with students is I'll say I'm getting you started, and what I would like you to do, and probably I don't even make this explicit, but what I'm thinking of is hopefully I'm picturing my kids are just young enough, and I remember when they were learning to ride a bike, you'd run along with them for a ways,
Right.
and then you let go.
Yep.
And you want them to keep doing more or less what they were doing when you were helping them.
But a lot better.
But better as they go along. I think of myself as doing basically that. I don't know that I make it explicit, but that's what I hope the students are doing. I do tell them I can't make you like the best technical writer you're ever going to be in just the 4 years you're here. You're going to get better and better, but you'll get better by keeping doing what we started.
That's why I almost think that the peer evaluation is a really important part because it's so much easier to rip apart somebody else's work
Yeah.
than to rip apart your own work.
Yeah.
And so I realized this by mistake. I became a much better writer after I became a faculty member when I had to rewrite all my students' work.
Right.
And I'm going like, oh, this is crap. And I'm going like, oh, geez, that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes you much more self-aware
Yeah.
by doing that process. And it also makes you realize how important it is to always have someone else read over your paper.
Yeah.
And it's built into institutions, so I was at Bell Labs. No paper got out of Bell Labs until it was reviewed internally first.
Right.
Same with the national labs. And it doesn't happen at universities, but it should. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's valuable, really valuable work. And it's what keeps in institutions. That's why Bell Labs had so many great papers.
Yeah.
Because they were self-policing, self-editing.
Thing I can say this quickly. One thing I do with my students with peer review is I give them a structure for this. I make them write as many good things about the other student's paper first before they do the things. These are the things that need to be improved.
Yeah.
They're also not allowed to use the word like weakness or things like that or problem. It has to be, areas for things for improvement.
Yep.
Right? But positive things first, and as many positive things as
That's a great
criticism.
suggestion. Awesome.
Yeah, that is an area where I see a lot of high performing students struggle is giving themselves credit for the things they do well.
Yeah.
And for us to actually explicitly reinforce that and say, note the aspects of your work that are already succeeding.
Yep.
That's something that's important for them to hear, maybe more frequently.
Yeah, it's an essential element to all, sort of public or peer sort of review of students. Positive stuff first.
Well, sadly, the clock says we have to stop.
Yep.
But before we do, since you have the entire internet before you, if there's anything you'd like to share with the world, any interesting projects or book recommendations or just stuff you want to put out there, this is your chance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the questions you gave me earlier were like, what projects are you working on? One thing I'm working on right now, and I'm hoping that this is good enough that I won't regret sort of making it better known. It's not yet. Is I'm working on a web module for ASCE, American Society for Engineering Education, for their global communication project on culturally aware argumentation in engineering.
Oh, interesting.
And looking at some of the things I actually talked about earlier, but actually being able to do it more visually and working out this is the structure of an engineering argument. And here's where cultural considerations may be especially pertinent and how. So that's not done yet, not published yet, but hopefully it'll, that should be available in the coming months. And I'm hoping it's good, and I'm hoping it's as good as I expect it will be.
Well, if you need a peer reviewer to tell you all the things that are great about it, you know where to find us.
Yep, 100%.
Perfect.
All right. That was fantastic.
Yep. I think it's time to
Thanks.
wrap this up. Christian, thank you again so
Thanks.
much for coming on the show, spending your time with us. It's been a pleasure to talk with you on the record
Yep.
for once. And I think that's it. So to everyone out in the audience, we appreciate you sticking all the way to the end, and we'll see you on the next episode of Undercooled.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone.